It started with a meeting no one was supposed to know about. Behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace, senior aides moved with unusual urgency while royal schedules were quietly rearranged. By nightfall, whispers had begun spreading through palace corridors. Something significant had happened, and at the center of it all stood King Charles. What emerged days later would send shockwaves through the monarchy and permanently alter Prince Andrew's future. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, there appeared to be nothing unusual about the gathering. Senior members of the royal household often met behind closed doors, discussing matters that rarely reached the public eye. But this time felt different. Palace staff reportedly noticed a level of secrecy that exceeded even the strict standards normally associated with royal affairs. Meetings were scheduled without explanation. Long-established routines suddenly changed. Trusted aides were instructed to keep conversations brief and avoid discussing certain topics outside designated offices. The atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace became noticeably tense, as though everyone understood that something important was unfolding, but very few knew exactly what it was. As the days passed, reports began to emerge suggesting that a major decision had been under consideration for weeks. According to palace insiders, discussions had been taking place among senior advisors, legal experts, and members of the king's inner circle. The subject of those conversations remained closely guarded, but one detail continued to surface again and again. Prince Andrew was nowhere to be found. While other senior figures were reportedly consulted during this sensitive period, Andrew appeared absent from key discussions that could directly affect his future. For many observers, that absence spoke louder than any official statement. The silence itself became impossible to ignore. Royal calendars were quietly adjusted. Certain meetings were postponed. Others were added without public notice. Behind the scenes, aides moved carefully, aware that even the smallest leak could trigger a media storm. Yet despite their efforts, whispers continued to spread. Some believed the palace was preparing a significant restructuring. Others suspected that King Charles had finally reached a decision regarding one of the most difficult and controversial issues of his reign. What made the situation even more striking was the growing sense that this was not a sudden development. Those familiar with royal affairs claimed that concerns had been building for months. The discussions now taking place were merely the final stage of a process that had begun long ago. Every conversation, every private consultation, and every unexplained adjustment seemed to point toward the same conclusion. A line was about to be drawn. A chapter that had lingered unresolved for years was approaching its decisive moment. Inside royal circles, anticipation grew with each passing day. No official announcement had yet been made, but many sensed that a dramatic shift was already underway. The institution appeared to be preparing itself for a decision whose consequences would reach far beyond a single individual. And as speculation intensified, one unavoidable question remained hanging over Buckingham Palace. What exactly was King Charles preparing to do? But the decision taking shape behind those palace walls was rooted in a controversy that had haunted the monarchy for years. Long before the final order was signed, Prince Andrew's position within the royal family had been hanging by a thread. Every attempt to move forward seemed to pull the monarchy back into a chapter many believed should have remained closed forever. The uncertainty surrounding Prince Andrew did not emerge overnight. It had been building quietly for years, growing heavier with every passing season. What made the situation so difficult for the monarchy was not simply the controversy itself, but the way it refused to fade into the background. Time moved forward. Royal milestones came and went. New priorities emerged. Yet the same questions continued to follow the institution wherever it turned. For King Charles, who had inherited not only the crown but also the burdens attached to it, the issue represented a challenge that seemed impossible to fully escape. As public attention intensified, Andrew's role within royal life steadily diminished. Appearances became increasingly rare. Responsibilities that once formed part of his routine gradually disappeared. Events that would have once included him no longer did. With each passing year, the distance between Andrew and active royal service became more noticeable. Yet despite those changes, the debate never truly ended. The absence of official duties did not eliminate public concern. Instead, it created a strange and uncomfortable limbo, one that left many wondering whether the monarchy had actually resolved the issue or merely postponed a final decision. Behind the scenes, that uncertainty reportedly created growing tension. Some believed enough had already been done. Others feared that failing to take stronger action risked damaging the institution's credibility for years to come. The monarchy depends heavily on public confidence, and many insiders reportedly worried that every renewed discussion about Andrew reopened wounds the palace had spent years trying to heal. What should have been a period focused on the future often found itself pulled back toward unresolved questions from the past. The challenge facing King Charles was particularly complex because it touched both personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. Andrew was not simply another royal figure, he was family. That reality added emotional weight to every discussion taking place behind palace walls. Yet the crown operates according to a different standard. Personal relationships may matter deeply, but the survival of the institution often demands decisions that carry painful consequences. That tension reportedly became one of the defining struggles surrounding the issue. What made matters even more difficult was the growing realization that previous efforts had not produced the clarity many hoped for. Restrictions had been introduced. Public appearances had been reduced, distancing measures had been implemented, yet the controversy remained a recurring topic of discussion. Every time the monarchy attempted to focus on a new chapter, old questions resurfaced. Every effort to close the door seemed to leave it slightly open. The issue lingered like an unfinished sentence, refusing to reach a conclusion. Within royal circles, concern reportedly shifted from managing the controversy to confronting a more uncomfortable possibility. What if temporary measures were no longer enough? What if the only way to finally end years of uncertainty was through a decision far more definitive than anything attempted before? Those questions grew louder as pressure from both inside and outside the institution continued to build. And as that pressure intensified, discussions that once seemed impossible slowly began entering the realm of serious consideration. As public scrutiny intensified, palace officials reportedly began discussing solutions that once seemed unthinkable. What began as quiet conversations soon evolved into something far more serious. Deep within the royal administration, plans were allegedly being reviewed that could permanently redefine Andrew's place within the monarchy. The whispers that had once circulated only among a small circle of advisors were no longer being treated as speculation. Reports suggested that discussions had entered a new phase, one marked not by uncertainty but by calculation. The question was no longer whether Prince Andrew's position posed challenges for the monarchy. That debate had already been exhausted. The focus had shifted towards something much larger and far more consequential. Palace officials were reportedly examining what the institution would look like years from now, and whether unresolved issues from the past could continue to occupy space within that future. At the center of those conversations stood a growing concern about long-term stability. The monarchy had spent years attempting to modernize, adapt, and strengthen public confidence during a period of extraordinary change. King Charles was navigating the early years of his reign, while Prince William increasingly represented the institution's future direction. Against that backdrop, many insiders reportedly believed that every lingering controversy carried a cost. The crown could endure criticism. It could survive difficult headlines. But uncertainty, especially uncertainty that never seemed to end, was viewed as a threat of its own. That realization reportedly brought senior advisors together in a series of increasingly focused discussions. Legal experts examined existing arrangements. Communications teams evaluated public perception. Royal strategists looked beyond immediate challenges and toward the next generation of the monarchy. Piece by piece, they began constructing a picture of what the institution needed in order to move forward without carrying unresolved burdens behind it. The conclusion as emerging from those reviews were said to be difficult, even uncomfortable, but increasingly difficult to ignore. Prince William's reported involvement added another layer of significance. As heir to the throne, his perspective carried immense weight. According to those familiar with palace dynamics, William had long emphasized the importance of protecting the monarchy's credibility. Public trust was not simply a matter of reputation. It was the foundation upon which the institution rested. Every decision, every appearance, and every public role ultimately reflected upon the crown itself. That reality reportedly fueled concerns among several senior royals who feared that leaving questions unanswered could create greater problems in the years ahead. Meanwhile, internal reviews of royal responsibilities continued gathering momentum. What had once appeared to be routine administrative assessments reportedly evolved into a broader examination of roles, expectations, and accountability. Officials were no longer looking at temporary restrictions. They were studying permanence. The possibility that certain decisions might need to extend indefinitely began appearing in conversations that previously focused on short-term solutions. For some, the shift was startling. For others, it seemed inevitable. As these discussions deepened, a striking pattern began to emerge. Nearly every path forward appeared to lead toward the same destination. Different advisors approached the issue from different angles. Some focused on public perception. Others emphasized institutional stability. Still others looked at future succession and long-term strategy. Yet despite their different perspectives, many reportedly arrived at remarkably similar conclusions. The monarchy could not fully turn the page while one of its most persistent controversies remained unresolved. What had started as an effort to manage a difficult situation was gradually transforming into something far more decisive. Behind closed doors, the idea of a permanent solution no longer seemed radical. It was becoming increasingly realistic. And as momentum gathered inside the palace, those involved reportedly understood that a moment of reckoning was approaching. The conversations had run their course. The evaluations were nearing completion. Soon, decisions would have to replace discussions, and consequences would replace speculation. Then came the moment when discussions turned into action, and the future of one royal was suddenly placed on a countdown. The closer the palace moved toward a decision, the quieter everything became. Staff noticed fewer briefings, fewer explanations, and far more secrecy. Something significant was being prepared, and only a handful of people knew exactly what it was. By this stage, the atmosphere surrounding the issue had changed completely. The endless debates, consultations, and private reviews that had dominated previous months were slowly giving way to something more concrete. According to reports from those familiar with palace operations, discussions were no longer centered on possibilities. They were centered on execution. Somewhere behind the carefully controlled silence of Buckingham Palace, a formal course of action was reportedly being drafted. For the first time, what had once seemed like a distant possibility was beginning to take the shape of reality. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Senior aides who had spent months evaluating options were now focusing on consequences. Legal advisors reportedly reviewed language with extraordinary precision. Communications teams examined potential responses from the public, the media, and political observers. Every scenario appeared to be studied from multiple angles. The reason was simple. Whatever decision emerged would not affect only one individual. It would send a message about the monarchy itself. It would reveal how far King Charles was willing to go in order to protect the institution he had inherited. That responsibility reportedly weighed heavily on everyone involved. The monarchy had endured difficult periods before, but this situation carried a unique sensitivity. Public trust had become one of the most valuable assets the institution possessed. Years of controversy had already tested that trust, and many insiders believed the palace could not afford further uncertainty. Yet there were risks on every side. A decisive move could trigger criticism. A cautious move could be portrayed as weakness. The challenge was finding a path that balanced duty, loyalty, and public expectation without creating even greater turmoil. As preparations intensified, reports suggested that King Charles himself faced immense pressure. The decision reportedly carried both personal and institutional consequences. On one hand stood family history, relationships, and the emotional realities that come with them. On the other stood the crown and its long-term stability. Those closest to the situation allegedly understood that the king was being asked to confront one of the most difficult choices of his reign. Whatever happened next would inevitably shape perceptions of his leadership for years to come. Meanwhile, conversations surrounding permanence grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Earlier discussions had often focused on restrictions, limitations, and temporary arrangements. Now, insiders claimed that a different question dominated private meetings. What if temporary measures had reached the end of their usefulness? What if the only effective solution was one designed to endure indefinitely? The more that possibility was examined, the more seriously it appeared to be treated. What once seemed extraordinary was gradually becoming the most likely outcome. Among palace staff, anticipation quietly intensified. Few knew the details, but many sensed that a turning point was approaching. Small signs appeared everywhere. Increased confidentiality, restricted discussions, carefully managed schedules. The institution seemed to be bracing itself for a moment whose significance would extend far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. Every passing day brought fresh speculation. Every unanswered question added to the tension. And behind it all, a growing realization took hold that the countdown described by insiders was no longer theoretical. The machinery of the monarchy had begun moving toward a final destination. Months of review, uncertainty, and strategic planning were converging into a single decision. Those closest to the process reportedly understood that once the next step was taken, there would be no easy way back. The consequences would ripple through the royal family, through the institution, and through the public conversation surrounding both. All that remained was the final stage of the process. When the final document reached the king's desk, the monarchy stood on the edge of one of its most consequential decisions in years. Then it happened. According to reports circulating among royal watchers and palace insiders, King Charles finally approved the measure many thought he would never authorize. One signature transformed years of uncertainty into a definitive outcome. For months, speculation had surrounded what the palace might eventually do. Observers debated possibilities. Commentators analyzed every subtle development. Insiders hinted that significant conversations were taking place behind closed doors. Yet despite all the rumors, many still believed there would be limits to how far the monarchy was willing to go. After all, this was not simply an administrative matter. This involved family, history, and decades of royal life. That was why the reports emerging from Buckingham Palace carried such extraordinary weight. They suggested that the moment of decision had finally arrived. According to those claims, King Charles approved a directive that effectively ended any remaining uncertainty surrounding Prince Andrew's role within the institution. The discussions that had stretched across months, perhaps even years, reportedly reached their conclusion in a single act. What had once been temporary became permanent. What had once been debated became settled. The long chapter of ambiguity that had surrounded Andrew's future appeared to close with a finality that few could ignore. The significance of that moment reportedly rippled through palace operations almost immediately. Staff who had spent months preparing contingency plans now found themselves confronting reality. Administrative structures that had remained in place while decisions were pending suddenly faced a new landscape. The atmosphere inside royal circles reportedly shifted from anticipation to adjustment. Questions that had once focused on what might happen were replaced by questions about what would happen next. For many palace employees, the emotional impact was difficult to separate from the institutional one. Some had worked within royal households for decades. They had witnessed changing reigns, family triumphs, and family crises. They understood that the monarchy often required difficult choices, yet that understanding did not make such choices easier to process. Reports suggested that reactions varied widely. Some viewed the decision as a necessary step toward protecting the institution's future. Others reportedly reflected on the personal cost attached to such a profound turning point. What united nearly everyone was an awareness that they were witnessing a moment that would likely be remembered for years. The historic nature of the reported decision became a major topic of discussion almost immediately. Supporters argued that it represented a clear effort to place institutional stability above individual circumstances. Critics questioned whether the move would fully resolve the challenges that had surrounded the issue for so long. But regardless of where opinions fell, few disputed the scale of the moment itself. The monarchy had spent years navigating one of its most persistent controversies. Now it appeared to be choosing clarity over uncertainty, permanence over postponement. At the center of it all stood King Charles. Reports suggested that the decision carried enormous emotional weight. The crown demanded leadership, but leadership often required sacrifices that remained invisible to the public. For a monarch balancing duty with personal relationships, the reported approval of such a measure was not simply a political calculation. It was a deeply human burden. That reality added another layer of significance to an already extraordinary development. As news of the reported decision spread, attention quickly turned toward its broader meaning. This was no longer only a story about Prince Andrew. It was becoming a story about the future direction of the monarchy itself. The institution appeared to be sending a message about accountability, responsibility, and the standards it expected moving forward. And as observers began examining what that message could mean, a larger question emerged. If such a significant decision could be made today, what might it reveal about the royal family's plans for tomorrow? Yet the consequences extended far beyond Andrew himself, reaching into the future of the monarchy. For many observers, this was never just about one prince. It was about the future shape of the monarchy itself. And nowhere was that future more clearly represented than in the vision reportedly championed by Prince William. As the immediate shock surrounding the reported decision began to settle, attention gradually shifted toward a larger story unfolding beneath the surface. The discussion was no longer focused solely on Prince Andrew, or even on the circumstances that led to such a dramatic outcome. Instead, many royal watchers began examining what the decision revealed about the direction in which the monarchy was heading. Increasingly, one name appeared at the center of that conversation: Prince William. For years, reports had suggested that William favored a more focused and streamlined institution. The concept was not built around expansion, but around concentration. Fewer working royals, clearer responsibilities, greater accountability, stronger connections with the public. Supporters of this approach argued that the modern monarchy could no longer rely solely on tradition to maintain relevance. It needed trust. It needed credibility. Most importantly, it needed a structure capable of meeting the expectations of a rapidly changing world. That philosophy reportedly influenced many of the conversations taking place behind palace walls. Public confidence had become one of the monarchy's most valuable assets, and William was often described as someone deeply aware of its importance. Unlike previous generations, which operated during a different social and media landscape, today's royals face scrutiny that moves faster, spreads wider, and lasts longer. Every decision is examined, every controversy is amplified. Every perceived inconsistency can quickly become a national conversation. In that environment, many insiders believed that maintaining public trust required a different approach than the one used in decades past. The contrast between generations reportedly became increasingly visible. Older traditions emphasized patience, discretion, and gradual change. The emerging generation appeared more willing to confront difficult realities directly. That did not mean abandoning royal values. Rather, it meant adapting them to modern expectations. The institution still represented continuity, duty, and service, but the standards by which those qualities were judged had evolved. What worked 50 years ago did not necessarily work today. Within that broader vision, Andrew's position reportedly became harder and harder to reconcile. The issue was not merely about history. It was about perception, accountability, and future stability. Many observers argued that a monarchy built around transparency and public confidence could not easily carry unresolved controversies indefinitely. Whether fair or unfair, the continued association created questions that distracted from the institution's broader goals. For those focused on long-term strategy, that reality reportedly became impossible to ignore. As a result, the reported decision surrounding Andrew increasingly came to symbolize something larger than itself. It represented a shift in priorities, a shift in expectations, and perhaps most significantly, a shift in how the monarchy intended to define itself moving forward. The contrast was striking. On one side stood an institution shaped by history, loyalty, and family ties. On the other stood an institution seeking to secure its future in a world demanding greater accountability. The tension between those two forces had driven much of the story unfolding behind palace walls. For Prince William, according to many reports, the ultimate objective was not punishment but preservation. The monarchy's survival depended on its ability to adapt without losing its core identity. That balancing act would define not only the reign of King Charles, but eventually William's own future as monarch. Decisions made today would echo for decades. They would influence how the public viewed the institution, how future generations understood its purpose, and how effectively it navigated the challenges still to come. Yet while conversations increasingly focused on the future, one unavoidable question remained. No matter how significant the broader vision might be, there was still a human dimension to the story. A decision had reportedly been made, a chapter had been closed, and many now wondered what came next for the man standing at the center of it all. As the palace looked ahead, attention shifted to how Andrew would respond to a decision that appeared irreversible. For a man who had spent decades as a working royal, the reality of permanent exclusion carried profound implications. The title remained, but the role that once defined his public identity seemed to have disappeared. For Prince Andrew, the reported decision represented more than the loss of responsibilities. It signaled the end of an era that had shaped much of his adult life. For decades, his identity had been closely connected to official duties, public engagements, and the unique position that comes with being a senior member of the royal family. Regardless of the controversies that later emerged, those years formed a significant part of his personal story. That is what made the reported outcome so emotionally complex. It was not merely a change in status. It was the closing of a chapter that could never be reopened in quite the same way again. According to those who closely follow royal affairs, the adjustment carried both practical and symbolic consequences. Official responsibilities reportedly vanished from the equation entirely. The possibility of returning to a public royal role, something that had remained the subject of speculation for years, appeared to fade even further into the distance. What remained was a title without the active function that once accompanied it. For many observers, that distinction was powerful. It highlighted the difference between belonging to the royal family and serving as a working representative of the crown. The public response reflected that complexity. Some viewed the reported decision as an overdue conclusion to a difficult situation. Others focused on the personal dimension of the story, recognizing the human cost behind such a dramatic shift. Across newspapers, television discussions, and online platforms, reactions varied widely. Yet one theme appeared consistently. People understood that something significant had occurred. Whether they agreed with the decision or not, few questioned its importance. Meanwhile, speculation surrounding family dynamics intensified. Royal families, despite their public responsibilities, remain families. Behind every institutional decision are personal relationships shaped over decades. Reports suggested that emotions inside royal circles were likely far more complicated than any official statement could convey. Loyalty, disappointment, duty, and history all existed side by side. The public could only see fragments of those realities. But many suspected that difficult conversations had taken place long before any decision reached its final stage. Questions about Andrew's future quickly followed. What would daily life look like moving forward? How would his position evolve now that the possibility of returning to official service appeared increasingly remote? Would public attention eventually shift elsewhere, or would discussions surrounding his role continue for years to come? Those questions lingered without clear answers. In many ways, the reported decision resolved one chapter while opening another. Yet perhaps the most striking aspect of the entire situation was its symbolic significance. Throughout modern royal history, there had always been an expectation that membership in the institution carried both privilege and responsibility. The reported removal underscored that distinction in a way few developments ever had. It suggested that public service, rather than status alone, remained central to how the monarchy defined itself. That message resonated far beyond any single individual. As attention continued to focus on Andrew's future, a deeper realization began taking hold among many observers. The real story was no longer about one prince's circumstances. It was about what those circumstances revealed regarding the monarchy's priorities, its values, and its willingness to make difficult choices in pursuit of long-term stability. The institution appeared to be sending a signal about where it stood and where it intended to go. And in that sense, the implications stretched far beyond the personal consequences faced by any one member of the royal family. But perhaps the greatest consequence was not what happened to Andrew, it was what the decision revealed about the monarchy itself. In the end, this story was never simply about one individual. It was about an institution confronting difficult choices in order to protect its future. And those choices may define the reign of King Charles for years to come. As the dust surrounding the reported decision slowly began to settle, a broader picture started to emerge. What initially appeared to be a story about one royal figure had evolved into something much larger. At its core, it was a story about the monarchy's struggle to balance tradition with survival. Throughout its long history, the institution has endured wars, scandals, political upheavals, and profound social change. Its ability to survive has often depended on its willingness to adapt while preserving the values that define it. Many observers believe this latest chapter may ultimately be remembered as another example of that difficult balancing act. Reports surrounding the decision suggested that institutional stability had become the overriding priority. In times of uncertainty, the monarchy relies heavily on public confidence. Trust cannot be commanded. It must be earned repeatedly through actions that demonstrate accountability, responsibility, and consistency. For years, questions surrounding Andrew's position created ongoing challenges for the institution. Whether fair or unfair, those questions continued, drawing attention away from the monarchy's broader mission. By reportedly bringing the matter to a definitive conclusion, the palace appeared to signal that protecting long-term stability outweighed the discomfort of making difficult choices. The decision also carried significant implications for King Charles's legacy. Every monarch faces defining moments that shape how history remembers their reign. Some are marked by celebration, others emerge from crisis. According to many royal commentators, this situation may ultimately fall into the second category. The reported decision required navigating competing pressures from every direction. Family considerations stood on one side. Institutional responsibility stood on the other. The path forward was never likely to satisfy everyone. Yet leadership is often measured not by the ease of decisions, but by the willingness to make them when circumstances demand action. At the same time, a powerful message appeared to be taking shape. The monarchy seemed determined to emphasize that service remains at the heart of its purpose. Titles alone are not enough. History alone is not enough. Public trust depends upon active responsibility and accountability. That message resonated strongly with a younger generation that increasingly expects transparency from public institutions. In many ways, the reported decision reflected changing expectations about what modern royal service should represent. The rise of a new generation of royals further reinforced that impression. Prince William and Catherine continue to be viewed by many as central figures in the institution's future. Their approach reportedly reflects a monarchy that seeks to remain relevant while preserving its historic identity. The transition between generations is never simple. It often requires difficult adjustments, uncomfortable conversations, and choices that carry emotional consequences. Yet those transitions are also what allow institutions to endure. Perhaps the most striking lesson from this entire story is the apparent triumph of duty over personal relationships. That principle has long existed at the heart of royal life. Again and again throughout history, monarchs and their families have faced situations where personal feelings collided with public responsibility. According to reports surrounding this decision, that tension once again became impossible to avoid. The outcome suggests preserving the institution remained the highest priority, even when the human cost was significant. As royal watchers continue debating the meaning of these developments, one thing appears increasingly clear. The future of the crown will likely be shaped by decisions that place stability, accountability, and public confidence at the center of its mission. The reported removal of Andrew from remaining royal duties may be remembered not simply as the end of one chapter, but as the beginning of another. A chapter defined by adaptation, generational change, and an ongoing effort to secure the monarchy's place in a rapidly evolving world. And while the palace may eventually move on from the controversy, the day King Charles reportedly signed the order removing Andrew from every royal duty will remain a defining moment in the ongoing story of the British monarchy. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.